My name is Doug Kaufmann. For the past 40 years, I've dedicated my life and even my career to finding the root cause of disease. Join me in a team of physicians, pharmacists, and scientists, and soon you too will know the cause. Well, good afternoon, friends. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Doug Kaufmann, the host of this show. It's called Know the Cause. I'm a humbled host. Very often, I give my opinions of things, but you know more than I. The third segment on this show is going to prove that. The first segment, we're talking about something called biofilms. Unlike these yeasts and mildew and fungus that can circulate through our body and cause septicemia, or what we call yeast systemic problems, biofilms attach. And they can attach, and I believe they occlude arteries, they put pressure on nerves, and they make people miserable. So I want to educate you a little bit on biofilms. One of the problems is most doctors believe that biofilms are all bacterial. The word hasn't leaked out yet. The yeast also make biofilms, okay? Where do they come from? How do we get rid of them, most importantly? Second thing I want to talk to you about is what is this explosion of liver cancer? Not in all countries, but in some countries we are seeing liver cancer rates go absolutely like that. Let's talk about liver cancer or hepatocellular carcinoma, okay? The third segment I'm going to need your help on a little bit. We're talking about biblical mildew. I'm not a Bible theologist. I don't know everything perhaps that you folks know, but I do know this word mildew and yeast is referenced over and over and over, not only in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament too. And what significance is that for all of us? Why don't medical books have mildew and yeast mentioned over and over and over? Help me with that segment. Okay, let's get started with something called biofilm formation. You know, it's interesting when I teach people about something called atherosclerosis. This is a book that Dr. A.V. Costantini wrote, 700 pages, saying that atherosclerosis is a fungal problem, okay? I attended his Congress many years ago in Canada, and I truly believe he is right. But how does atherosclerosis happen? Folks, pretend these are yeast cells or bacterial cells. This is one of those little sticky notepads, okay? So here's one of them. You peel it off. It adheres to your vein. One of them doesn't, atherosclerosis makes. And when it becomes thick, over and over and over, we're peeling these little things off. Now you've got a major occlusion in a major artery in your body. I think very often that's what atherosclerosis is. Doctors totally disagree with me, but when I read this book 21 years ago, Atherosclerosis, Hope at Last, it all began to make sense to me. These are little stick-it Post-its. Only you get 15, 30, 100, 200 of them, and you've got some major occlusion in your arteries. So let's talk a little bit about what we call biofilms. Now remember, we believe that fungemia, that fungus circulates throughout our body. When bacteria does that, we call it septicemia, and that can take someone down very quickly. That's doctor time, IV antibiotic time. But yeast seem to harmonize with some of our blood cells and seems to not cause the same dramatic symptoms that septicemia with bacteria cause. Okay, let's get started. First, let's define it. A biofilm is a thick layer of prokaryotic organisms, now that's important, that have aggregated to form a colony. The colony attaches to the surface with a slime layer and aids in protecting the microorganism, the fungus or the bacteria itself. Now, remember that word prokaryotic organism? Prokaryotes have no nucleus, but eukaryotes have a nucleus. Bacteria are prokaryotes. Fungi are eukaryotes, as are human cells. There's a huge difference. What this is saying, a major dictionary in biology, is saying biofilms are formed by bacteria, prokaryotes. They don't have a nucleus. Wait a minute, can't fungus form a biofilm? Folks, that's where we are today. Everything in medical training, God bless them, everything is bacteria, because there are pharmacies with 200 antibiotics in them. there are only a handful, a tiny handful of antifungal drugs. So what is being taught in medical training seminars and so forth is everything is bacteria. Doctor, you need to give these patients antibiotic after antibiotic after antibiotic. Could antibiotics be building biofilms in fungal disease patients or fungal infections? I think that could be. Here's the take-home message from this first graphic. A prokaryote is like a bacteria, no nucleus. A eukaryote is like yeast cells, fungal cells, and human cells. We have nuclei with DNA in them, as do yeast cells, okay? The next graphic, Candida yeast biofilms, you mean there are some of these? Devices such as shunts, prosthesis like voice, heart valve, knee, etc., stents, implants, eye lenses, breast implants, dentures, etc., endotracheal tubes, pacemakers, and various types of catheter all have been shown to support colonization and biofilm formation by Candida. Folks, Candida is a yeast. There's Candida glabrata, Candida tropicalis, Candida albicans. There's many, many different forms of Candida, many species of yeast also. But understand, here they're saying, gee, if you had a catheter, urinary catheter in the hospital, if you've had lens implants, you're more vulnerable to yeast overgrowth, not so much bacterial, but yeast. And doctors know this forever. When a patient's in a hospital with a urinary catheter in for an extended period of time, sometimes prophylactically, that means they'll give you an antifungal, a bloodstream antifungal, just to prevent yeast colonizing on or in that catheter. Anytime we have anything artificial put in our body and left for a period of time, it can begin to colonize this candida, this yeast, okay? Treatment of fungal biofilm infections. Now here's where it gets tough. Antifungal drugs really don't seem to cure these biofilm fungal infections, but one strategy has been to use antimicrobial peptides. They're called AMPS. Antimicrobial peptides. Here's where I want your brain to go right now. Gee, on Kaufmann's diet, it says to eat a lot of greens, spinach, kale, lettuce, bell peppers, etc. Eat a lot of greens, right? Let's go to the next graphic. Plants, God is good. Plant antimicrobial peptides, or PAMPs, are protein compounds produced by plants to defend against bacteria and fungal infections. According to researcher Amanda Maxwell, these are found throughout the plant, existing in its leaves, the stem, the stalk, and other tissues. Plants can release these PAMPs in response to microbial infection and infestation. So here's what I want you to know. Here's the take-home message. Okay, what is a biofilm? Many of you have just learned this. It's sometimes sticky stuff that coats inside, around our heart, around our lungs, liver, and so forth. And the doctor can take a biopsy, but they'll say you have a biofilm formation. Okay, doc, what is that? When a doctor says that, most of the time his brain is geared to think bacteria. And yet we're learning. Candida yeast, this type of fungus, can colonize those biofilms also. What do we do if our antifungal drugs or antibacterials don't get rid of it? God is good. We think about eating the right foods, okay? Yeast and fungal biofilms. Can these cause the exact these can cause the exact symptoms and misery that fungus anywhere in your body can cause. Antifungal drugs don't seem to eradicate them. This is yet another reason to follow the Kaufmann diet with emphasis on plant-based foods. Do you know how many people go through so much misery, folks, because doctors don't fully comprehend, they don't fully understand yeast and fungal problems? Well, they know ringworm, vaginal yeast, toenail fungus, but what if that same yeast colonized the pericardium, the sac around the heart, or the lungs? We'd end up with asthma and COPD and cystic fibrosis and all these miserable diseases, to wit, very often, antibiotics are handed to the patient. Antibiotics can sometimes fuel fungus in your body. We now know that 96% of all chronic sinusitis is due to fungus, and yet these patients still get antibiotics. Okay, when we get back, what's with this explosion of liver cancer? Can we figure it out? Come with me. Many of you are following the Kaufmann diet and feel great, but you have questions about it. Scientifically, where does this diet sit? Why am I following it? Why do I feel good? The book is now released, Eating the Right Foods to Feel Great. Get your copy today.
I was just talking with Doug, telling him that I was a breast cancer patient about 3 years ago. I decided to not do radiation and not do chemo. I just had a lumpectomy. That's all I had. And it was invasive, stage 2 cancer. And I read Doug's books and decided that I was going to go with the approach of building my immune system up. I did a lot of juicing, and I did a lot of things that turned my diet around and turned my health around. And it's 4 years now, and I'm cancer-free, and I just have MRIs now. I don't have mammograms. And thanks to Doug, I think that we unlocked, we kind of broke the code there on the cancer, and I don't think I'm going to get it again. Thank you.
I saw a funny article on a medical website. It says, why do all these kids with acne think they have a fungal problem? Gee, you don't think Know the Cause had something to do with that, do you? There is fungal acne, yet all acne kids go on antibiotics. Think fungus. It's important that you know this. You know, I was reading a couple of weeks ago that there's literally an explosion of liver cancer. What is going on, folks? And if it is due to fungus, which that's what this show's epicenter is, fungus has been around forever. Why didn't we have this explosion a long, long time ago? I think it has to do a lot, believe it or not, with our dietary choices, and I'll try and prove that here. I've got a few graphics. Go with me here, because I want the scientist in you to read this and fully understand it, okay? Why this explosion of liver cancer? Okay, liver cancer or hepatocellular carcinoma. Globally, the highest rates of liver cancer are observed in Asia and Africa. Okay, this program is aired in Asia and Africa, and I'm just so hopeful that you folks will see this and maybe we'll figure this out together, okay? Asia and Africa, the rates of liver cancer are going just like this. Why is that? You know, if I were a statistician, an oncologist, a pediatrician seeing liver cancer, I'd have that same question. What is going on in these countries? Some, the liver cancer rate is static. Some, the liver cancer rate is actually going down. Why in Asia and Africa is this happening? Okay, watch this. The most staple Asian food, Cambodia, rice. Chinese, rice. Filipino, rice. Hmong, rice. Asian Indian, cereal and rice. Laotian, rice. Vietnamese, rice. Japan, rice. Do you see? Are you grasping this? Do you see where I'm going with this? Maybe not yet. Let me get the next graphic. Rice, fungus, and liver cancer. So says 5-6 years ago, Oncology Letters, Cancer Letters, in April of 2013, that reference down at the bottom. Hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer, is the most well-known primary liver malignancy and is a major health problem worldwide. Something called aflatoxin B1, or AFB1, is the most hepatocarcinogenic agent and a main contributor to the high rate of hepatocellular cancer. Aflatoxin B1 is found in a variety of foodstuffs, including corn and rice, for both human and animal consumption. You know, when I read that, I kind of had to pause. Wait a minute. In Asia, throughout Asian countries, a staple is rice. I was in Vietnam, and I remember looking out. It was diametric to me. There's a war going on here. Some people don't like me. They're trying to hurt me. And you'd wake up in the morning from under your tent, and you'd look at these fields of green rice paddies. They were absolutely splendid. The blue sky, the rice paddies, the monsoon rains had come down and helped grow the rice. You know, and so it was diametric. There's a war going on here, and yet look at how beautiful these rice paddies are. And I knew in Vietnam, I didn't know about other countries, but I knew in Vietnam that food was a staple. They often ate, what did they call it? Nuc mam. Nuc mam was raw fish mixed with rice, right? Decades later, in America, we'd call it sushi. It became a hit, right? But the rice was their staple all the time. With chopsticks, they would eat a lot of rice. And yet we're finding, according to this study 6 years ago, that aflatoxin B1, now folks, this is a poison made by Aspergillus mold. Mold can grow on rice during storage, or if there's a drought or flooding, mold can grow on the rice. And throughout the Asian nations, people are eating that moldy rice. And I think that's why we're seeing just skyrocketing liver cancer. How do you fix that? You know, you've got a grandma who fed her daughter rice. You've got a mom who is feeding her daughter rice. You know, you either clean up the supply. How are you going to do that if floods or droughts induce it or cause it? Or you've got to change your eating patterns. Well, as you'll see, that may not be a good idea either. Let's go to the next graphic. Aflatoxin B1 associated hepatocellular cancer, once again, oncology letters, is preventable if we avoid exposure to these poisons called aflatoxins by implementing numerous measures, including dietary changes, chemo prevention, and optimal food safety and regulation. It has also been well documented that fruit and vegetables have anti-cancer compounds. Okay, now you're thinking. Now you're thinking exactly the way I was thinking, okay? When they talk about chemo prevention, did you know that chlorophyll has been published in the scientific literature as being chemo prevention? If you're going through chemotherapy, take drops or eat chlorophyll, lots of green plants, right? That helps offset the damage being done to the cells by the chemotherapy. But then they're talking about maybe changing your diet a little bit here, and that kind of makes sense to me. Okay, let's go to the next graphic. The most staple food in Africa, okay? You know this, maize or corn. Endemic cancer of the esophagus. Now this is the esophagus, not the liver. Endemic cancer of the esophagus in Africa is associated with the use of maize as a staple. The esophagus is the most common site of tumor development in men in parts of eastern and southern Africa. Evidence exists which suggests that both the geographical and temporal distribution in Africa could reflect the use of maize as a major ingredient of alcoholic drinks. This comes from the British Journal of Cancer. So you think about corn distilled alcoholic beverages, and you say, okay, that's fermented yeast, that's ethanol, and we're drinking it. Why are we seeing in Africa skyrocketing rates of hepatocellular and esophageal cancer? It probably has much to do with corn. Here's a graphic. This comes from the Council of Agricultural Science and Technology. Corn is universally contaminated with the fungal mycotoxin fumonisin, and to a less degree other fungi and their toxins. Okay, does corn dovetail with liver cancer? Corn, fungus, and liver cancer. This comes out of the Journal of Applied Microbiology just 2 years ago. Aflatoxin, made by Aspergillus mold, is a fungal mycotoxin that causes human liver cancer. Aflatoxin concentrations were lab tested for 334 maize and groundnut samples from 27 African districts. 17%, folks, that's almost 1 in 5 of the crops from markets contained aflatoxin concentrations above allowable levels in Zambia, in Africa. If almost 20% of our corn has high levels of this known carcinogen, known to cause liver cancer, right? Then we've got to start rethinking this. Again, go back to what we were talking about in Asia. We've got to start, what? Either changing our staple, or we've got to start eating lots of fresh fruit, fresh vegetables to offset the damage. These foods absorb the mycotoxins. I mean, it's really fascinating work. Okay, maize, corn, fungus, and liver cancer. This comes out of the Journal of Gastroenterological Liver Disease. Aflatoxins, they're frequent contaminants of a number of staple foods, particularly corn and groundnuts in sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Asia, and parts of South America. Contamination of food occurs during the growth and as a result of storage in deficient or inappropriate facilities. These toxins pose serious public health hazards, including the cause of liver cancer by aflatoxin B1. I want you folks to know something. It's okay to have a staple like corn and rice. It's okay. Start eating a lot of greens with that before you go to bed at night, preferably. And I think you'll offset some of the damage being done by these grains. It's a really good idea to put a lot of vegetables in your diet when grain is the most palatable food, most viable food in these areas. Okay, when we get back, biblical mildew. Help me with this one. We'll be right back.
I had breast cancer in 2003, and then it came back in my bones in July of 2007. After I'd finished all my treatments, my doctor said, well, I guess we'll just wait and see. A friend of mine has been on Doug Kaufmann's program for 5 years, and she had breast cancer about 6 months before I did, and she's been cancer-free. And she said, why don't you try this diet? So I started the diet on August 1st, and in 6 months I've lost 45 pounds, and my tumor markers have been decreasing steadily. So I'm very excited about it because when I was taking all of the medication for the Flazodex and the Zometa, they were just going up and down, but it was only when I was on the diet that they went down dramatically. But my energy level is up, I feel great, I sleep well, I don't snore anymore. My sinuses, everything are all cleared up, and I just feel like I did when I was 25 or 30 years old, and I'm going to be 58 in March. The diet is wonderful. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. To tell you the truth, it's not easy. But with determination and the knowledge that this could work for you, definitely gives you at least a choice, and hopefully a good choice.
And welcome back, folks. Thank you so much for being with me. Isn't this interesting? Biofilms, liver cancer. Let's go to where I think all truth comes from, and that's from the Bible. I'm a guy who has read medical textbooks for 50 years, and I'll be darned if after doing that, I still haven't figured out why Americans are so sick. I've been able to intervene in much of that illness working clinically with doctors as a clinical nutrition person. I change their diet, I starve fungus, I put them on antifungal herbs, the doctors put them on antifungal medicines, and many, if not most of them, just get better from arthritis, from crippling diseases, from depression, from skin problems, etc. That has shown me the past half a century that I'm onto something very exciting. But you won't find a medical textbook that talks about mildew, mold, yeast, etc. Oh, they talk about bacteria, they talk about viruses, they talk about surgery, they talk about pharmacology, but they don't talk about the cause. I named this show, Understand the Etiology, Better Know the Cause. I was cleaning up the other day after working out, dripping sweat, standing in the shower, and I had an epiphany. I mean, it's just an epiphany. Doug, if you believe so much in this, why don't you share my word instead of medical textbooks words about this? And that is because I don't feel as though I know enough, but that would be a study. Let me tell you what I do know. Look at these graphics. Biblical mildew, the synonyms, similar meanings: yeast, fungus, rut, mushroom, toadstool, mold, blight, mycoses, dry rot, decay, canker. I mean, isn't that fascinating? You mean all this means yeast? Means mildew? Okay, this I've quoted you several times. I need to quote it again because it's the epicenter of my whole work. Leviticus 14:34 through 57. It opens with this. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when you enter the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as your possession, and I put a spreading mildew in a house in that land, the owner of the house must go and tell the priest, I have seen something that looks like mildew in my house. Look at the footnote in my NIV Bible. Why was mildew so dangerous? This fungus could spread rapidly and promote disease. See, to me, fait accompli, home run, done. No, this book doesn't say if you have cancer, it's because you may have eaten too much corn or too much rice or drunk too much alcohol, etc. The book says that mildew could grow rapidly and promote disease. That's why the people back in Leviticus in the Old Testament had to get out of the house. And then, as you know, Leviticus talks further, what if it gets on your clothing? What if it gets on your skin? Okay? And they reference leprosy and so forth. Folks, your house sometimes has to be burned. We don't do that in America. We don't burn a house that's loaded with mold. We go in and put new wallboard up and we hide the wood that's impregnated with the mold. And so the next tenant gets sick and the next tenant gets sick, okay? Let's keep going and dwell on the word leaven. The word leaven appears 22 times in the Old Testament and 17 times in the New Testament, with one exception. I've read this, Matthew 13:33. Leaven or yeast represents sin or evil. See, I'm staring down the pipe of that, and I'm thinking, much of what I see, I wish you could have been with me the past 50 years and seen diseases, seen the whole cheekbone gone, eaten away with cancer, seeing just the miserableness that people go through with suicidal depression, horrible skin problems, one lung doesn't work. Why? Could it be if I put a spreading mildew in that land and Doug Kaufmann moves into that home and we sweep it under the carpet in America? Insurance companies do not want mold to be a problem. So it's just mold doesn't cause a problem. Oh, a little itchy skin, a little tickle in the throat, a little sneezing, but it doesn't go that far. It should go that far. As you just heard, mold can cause cancer in my previous segment. Okay, but I find this fascinating that 39 times in the Bible, leaven, yeast is used. Don't be like the yeast of the Pharisees. Don't spread those false prophets. Isn't that amazing? Does this have more to do with our health? Because yeast metastasizes. That's what the Bible, that's what Jesus was saying here. Yeast metastasizes. So does cancer. So do many diseases. People who get migraine headaches most often have stomach problems, right? People with gallbladder disease most often have skin problems. I mean, it's just, you don't have one without the other. This stuff metastasizes, just like sin, just like evil, okay? Chametz, Hebrew word meaning sour. Sour precedes decay, a fermentation process of death. Chametz is a food forbidden for use by the Jews during the festival of Passover, especially a baked food as bread or cake made with leaven or a leavening agent. Isn't this fascinating? I'm telling you, someone, and I hope it's me, I feel that I've been challenged to write this information or write this book because I'm telling you that the Bible's got the answers in it. For illness, for sickness. We don't see that as a medical book, but when we look at medical books, that's all gone. What's going on here is we have to be careful of yeast and fermentation, right? Strong's Concordance defines mildew as a disease of grain due to moisture. Didn't we just talk about that with liver cancer? Leprosy is defined as a scourge, a cancer-like disease. I know the answers are in that book. And I hope in the next few years to expound on it for you so you and I better understand it. Hope you've enjoyed today's show. God bless.